we all know that the CEO could make a decision, but a good CEO will relegate that out to other people, right? It's the fact that we all have to speak the same language internally. You go around, you got to speak the same language, and you got to be aligned around the same goal.
But if you knew it all, then you wouldn't be underperforming.
I think as leaders, we may sometimes overestimate or underestimate what the employees already know. You better figure out how to bring people with you versus doing it yourself.
Ooh, the Modern Selling Podcast.
Modern Selling Nation, hello! Welcome to this episode, and you are going to be really, really interested in listening on all the things we're talking about in terms of how to manage and how to lead in a complex sales environment. I want to welcome my friend, Stephen Kowal, the Chief Commercial Officer from Nextivity. Stephen, welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, Mario, thank you so much. Real happy to be here and can't wait to speak with you today.
Well, it's going to be an exciting conversation. As you know, the Modern Selling Nation, we've been here. We're going to be going actually on our 8th season. We're coming up on our 8th season, 280-something episodes, top 1.5% of all podcasts globally. And I just want to give a shout out to the Modern Selling Nation. Thank you for being on this ride with us. So, Stephen, do me a favor, give a little background introduction about yourself, about Nextivity, and then I've got a very special question that I want to ask you.
Yeah, no problem. So myself, I'm about a 35-year veteran of selling. I've been doing this for quite a while. I last was at a big Fortune 500 company for 22 years, where I led a really large sales team. During the pandemic, decided to make a small change in my life, moved my family up here to Montana. And actually, Mario, I thought I was done selling, and then I got lured back in with this great company out of San Diego called Nextivity. I saw what they were doing. I saw the technology they had. I saw the opportunity that we had to make a big difference out there. And so I came out what I'll call as a midlife sabbatical, and I joined back up with Nextivity. And what Nextivity does is we are a coverage solution for buildings. So we bring into the building cellular coverage, public safety. So if you think about the first responders that come out to the building and they've got the radios on, we make those radios work inside of buildings. And then finally, we have a whole set of solutions that allow big companies to do private cellular inside the building. So a lot of technology stuff there, but it's just a great company doing great things. And, I've been there almost 3 years now, and I'm having a blast.
So, Stephen, I'm pretty sure that when I was in my former telecom days working for Sprint, and I used to manage the global accounts organization where we had the likes of the McKessons, the Chevrons, we used to build out these in-campus wireless connectivity solutions so that the wireless phones would work inside the building and across multiple layers within the building. I'm near darn positive that Nextivity was one of our partners that we worked with.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. So we do work with all the major carriers, and they love us because it's a real simple, easy to deploy system that, when that cell phone works outside the building, we've all had this problem, right? You're walking outside the building, you're on a phone call, you walk inside the building and it stops working. We fix that problem. And the carriers love us because we keep their customers happy.
Well, there you go. So there's definitely some complexities to this as well. And building this infrastructure out. But that having been said, listen, I always ask all my guests a very special question, and that is, before we get into the nuts and bolts and the meat, tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of their social profiles. And Stephen, I'm looking for something juicy, man. Just don't confess any grave sins.
No, let's see. There's a couple things I talk about quite a bit, and I can't avoid those. 7-time Ironman, but you can maybe find that on social media. I am a reserve deputy up here in Montana. Maybe that's at the bottom of Lake. Maybe what people don't know is for about 12 years, I was a private pilot when I lived there, so I didn't list that stuff. I loved it. I think there's no feeling like rolling down the runway, pulling back on the yoke, and taking off into the sky. Since that time, I moved over to Europe. I quit flying. I came home. I had a child. And, my view is if you can't fly a lot, you shouldn't fly because you shouldn't have to think about it. But I will tell you, just even saying this to you right now makes me want to go back out and get recertified to be a private pilot.
There you go, a private pilot. And I want to go back. What was the second thing you mentioned? That
Yeah, I'm a reserve deputy up here in Montana, so I'm don't speed through Raleigh County. I might pull you over.
okay. So tell me how that works. So when there's a need, there's an emergency, there's something that's they can't get to, they reach out to you and say, "Can you help?"
No. So we basically we're volunteers, so that's AKA not paid, and so we go through the about 180 hours of training to become deputized to get legally allowed to participate in law enforcement. And then we go and we'll schedule ourselves to augment the actual full-time employees or deputies that are there. So we'll ride with them and we'll back them up, and some of us can go out and drive on our own. So it's we're a big county with not a lot of resources. So we've got 40 full-time deputies and we've got 20 reserve deputies that augment that staff. So if you come up to Montana, you'll find that most of the firefighters are volunteer firefighting departments and things like that. So when you're in a small community, everybody's got to pitch in.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. It's certainly different than when you're in a major urban area like San Francisco, right? No, I appreciate that. I'd actually never heard that title before, but I of course know that people volunteer their time. So thank you for volunteering your time and back to the community. We appreciate that, no doubt. Well, let's get into some meats and potatoes. Clearly, you've been engaged in selling strategies for a very long time, for a lot of years. Things have changed over the course of time. Certainly, sales strategies have become more deep. We sometimes have to get a little bit more complex based upon the complex selling environment. So talk a little bit about that. What have you seen in terms of sales strategies and how they've evolved or changed over the past few years, especially when you get into complex solution selling?
Yeah, I think in complex selling, if you take a step back and say when we were just selling a widget, you just had to say, I've got this thing and it costs this much, and it fits into your organization like this. As you get into really complex selling organizations, you can't do a lot of things on your own anymore. We need to have integrators to help come integrate your solution. There might be other products and things that fit in with it to make it work, to make it successful for the customer. So when I get in and when my sales team gets in, we start selling, we're trying to focus on outcome-based desires, right? Like, what are you trying to solve? Like, what things are you trying to do as an organization? And then you bring together the ecosystem that can help solve that for them. So I think number one is just simply how more things have to fit together to make a solution work, right? There's not everybody's selling toasters that you just pull out of the box, plug in, and you put bread in, right? A lot of things have to happen. That's the first thing. The second thing that sure has happened inside of sales, and I'm sure all of your folks will feel the same way, is there are more people than ever that have veto power in a sales solution, there, right? It used to be, we knew the person, right? The person who could make the decision. Well, right now you've got technical influencers, you've got your economic buyers, you've got the executive committees, you've got procurement departments. And if you can't migrate your way through all of those folks and get them to all buy into the values, and the value proposition has to be a little bit different for every single one of them, right? They're all there for a different reason. You've just got to cover a lot of bases to close a deal these days. And, I think those are two of the biggest differences.
No doubt, buying influencers, and I love the terms that you use. You must be a Miller Hyman trained guy, meaning you use economic buyer. There you go. Strategic selling. So here's to digress for a moment. Here's a true story. When I was 21 years old, I started selling when I was 19. I started making six figures when I was 21, all software. And I was the youngest guy, of course, in my sales organization. So I decided that I needed to improve and up-level my skills on selling. And it was just all pure raw training that I got from my leadership. So I wrote a check for $5,000 to Miller Hyman. And I did a 5-day strategic selling. It was the blue sheets and the green sheets, I think it was. Yeah, green sheets. Back here in Concord, California, actually, for 5 days. Now, fast forward to a few years ago, before Miller Hyman was acquired by Korn Ferry, the $3 billion public recruiting firm. Miller Hyman reached out to us. Vengreso was the largest digital sales prospecting training company. and they were the world's largest sales training company. We ended up closing a contract, and Miller Heiman, for the first time in their 43-year history, hired an outside sales training company, and that was Vengreso. So that was, talk about like a full story right there. But you said the terms economic buyer, and immediately I knew, okay, this is strategic selling right here, and it's in the making.
I could have really gotten you by saying, if you don't have a coach, you're not going to win, right? That's just, I tell all my guys, if you come in and tell me you don't have a coach, my view is you have a 70% chance of losing because somebody else is being coached by them, right? So, I believe pretty strongly in the Miller Heiman approach, and I've actually been through recurring training a few times because I'm a 3-time going through the class kind of guy, so maybe it just took me a little longer to pick it up. But I every time I get a chance to be with the new sales organization, I bring them through that training.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm a big fan of Miller Heiman training, whether it's LAMP, strategic selling. We used to use that all the time in my sales organizations, and still having, actually, we figured out a way to embed it into our HubSpot CRM. But nonetheless, moving on to your commentary, outcome-based desires and decision-making, you said, and more people than ever that have veto power. And it's interesting you said that you didn't say that have the ability to help make a decision or contribute to a decision. You're talking about vetoing something, which is interesting because all the different dynamics of how we make decisions now in an organization with consensus and everybody wanting to be involved. So talk a little bit about when a seller goes through a sales process, how are they going to find that economic buyer, the user buyer? How are we going to find the coach? What do we do in that process to be able to make that happen?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think out of all those buying influences, the coach is the most important. You heard me kind of reference this before, because a lot of times we're coming into organizations and, you can't always tie a title with the decision maker, right? We all think, or we all know that the CEO could make a decision, but a good CEO will relegate that out to other people, right? It's most CEOs operate as informed decision makers. Yes, they hold ultimate responsibility, but they will allow others to get the information. So if you can establish a coach, and the number one way where we found to do this is, find somebody who has a problem that's personal to them, right? Like if they solve this problem, they think that they could move up in their career, or they can, they could work a little less every day, or there's something that you could do for them personally. You get in, and if they get a personal win, they feel a closer connection with you, right? If you get a closer connection, all of a sudden your conversations change. They start telling you, well, Fred's got the money and Julie's got the technical organization, and they start to coach you through this. So this is why we call them the coach, right? They're telling you, hey, go talk to the person on the left and go talk to the person on the right. The other thing is you end up in front of these at the time, gatekeepers. I think this is the way the book refers to them, or the Miller Heiman refers to them, and it's a great example of it. You need to get through this gate to get to a person. How do you get that person to want you to come by? It's not always about defeating them and just going around them like a good football play and, we beat them on this one. You want them to be invested in you and help you get there. So we tell them all the time about understanding people's personal wins in all these organizations. My team is very versed in asking people, how are they paid? How are they incented? How are they measured? And if you can start to align how you're pitching and what you're talking about in relation to their personal wins, you're going to get those answers a lot sooner, is what we've found.
And do you find that if these types of playbook questions that I call them, right, all the questions that you just asked, and then looking for the different persons like a coach, an economic buyer, a user buyer, any of these types of roles, do you find that this has to be ingrained into, say, the CRM, where a seller is really responsible for answering these questions so that they actually understand what's going on, or putting it into a green sheet or a blue sheet or something that actually forces the seller to recognize the holes and where they don't have the information?
Yeah, 100%. So, we do, as I hope most organizations do, use a CRM. And inside of that, there are really two things that I think that you have to do. Number one is, if you're going to talk about these roles, you better make it to where you can assign that role to a contact on an opportunity. That's the first thing. Because if I keep saying, you got to find me the economic buyer, but I don't allow you to say, this is the economic buyer, we're out of luck. But I think the most important part of that is managerial reviews of opportunities, right? So a really highly trained sales leader who is going to sit down and do funnel reviews and then ultimately do an opportunity review, and they know exactly what's going to be asked. So who is your coach, and what is the economic buyer's, key wins, and, what is the technical buyer looking for? What problem technically are they trying to solve? In procurement, the purchasing team, what are the requirements to be a vendor inside of this company? Are they requiring made in the USA? Are they requiring these types of things? So I think it's a dual role. Number one, you got to have the CRM that allows the seller to track it on their own, but then you have to have accountability to where they know that, hey, this opportunity could be checked in a weekly review call. And, I need to make sure I can answer the questions. And I think, that leads me to one other thing, Mario, that I always want to say. You can't use CRMs to punish people. That can't be the way, because they'll keep information out of it. They won't load deals. And, they have to buy into the fact that these review calls are good for them, that a second set of eyes may find some new opportunity, may find some new red flag, may find some new area of strength that they should use. And so you have to make sure that your sellers understand that it's productive and it helps them win more. And then they'll start asking, hey, can we do an opportunity review? Because this is one of my top reviews. And that's when you won, is when the sellers are asking for opportunity reviews. So, I think it's a multifaceted system, but you do have to be able to track those things.
There's the old saying that you could win alone, but never lose alone. So better to win as a team, right? And then you'll never lose alone. That's that old saying there. Now, interesting, as we talked about this, clearly, Stephen, you've had a plethora of experience from managing over 1,000 sellers in 90 countries to the Nextivity sales organization that you've got now. What are some of the key leadership lessons that you've learned in managing such a diverse team globally? And you started to touch on this with how a CRM should never be used to punish an individual. So let's tease this out a little bit longer, a little bit more in terms of some of these leadership lessons that you've learned.
Yeah. So, and inadvertently, we've already started speaking about one of them, right? And that is the fact that we all have to speak the same language internally. So we talk about these diverse sales teams, right? So I have people on my team that speak Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese. I'm not talking about that language. I'm talking about the sales methodology language. And I would just implore everybody out there, and I know we're really down up Miller Hyman, but whether you're a challenger or whoever it is, get your sales team to be just aligned around one sales methodology so that you are all speaking the same language, right? That when I say coach, it means the same thing to you. When I say red flags, when I say areas of strength, it's all the same. So the first is, we need to speak the same language, following the same sales methodology. But I think the second part of this about common, communication and language is that sharing the vision ultimately where you're going with the sales team in a language that they can coalesce around, that it again makes it more personal to them, will allow them to let you make change and adjustment and directions if they say, hey, I trust this change because I know where we're going. I know why we're implementing CRM because we want to get there. I know why there's a sales methodology being implemented and review calls being implemented because we're going there. And if they can coalesce around that common goal as a organization or a corporation, I think that you'll get a group of people who are more willing to help guide you there. And I think that's probably the two biggest things that I've learned as you go around. You got to speak the same language and you got to be aligned around the same goal.
So many times I speak to leaders and what I hear from them is that they can't get the organization moving in the direction that they want. And I think you hit something on the head there, and that is no matter what, you've got to have full disclosure, even if it's bad, right? And there were times in my organization where I wasn't sure how I was going to make payroll, right? I had to be able to articulate that and let people know where we were going. But here's the plan of what we're going to do. So even if it's something like that bad, where you're trying to rally the troops around trying to accomplish an end goal, you got to be able to speak truth, and you got to be able to put a plan in front of them. And I think that's the difference between someone saying, oh my God, I don't know, this is the problem, and I don't know what to do, versus, guys, we got a problem, and here's the plan to be able to make that successful. Anybody got any ideas? Anything you want to add? Anything you want to change? So that everybody gets bought on or bought in to that particular plan.
Yeah, Mario, and I think that you bring up a couple good points there. I think as leaders, we may sometimes overestimate or underestimate what the employees already know, right? Like we may be saying, hey, we're looking at the books and we see that profitability is down and that we have an expense issue and we have to deal with something. We think, well, at least the sellers don't know that. At least the frontline folks don't know that. They feel it, right? They feel it, they know it. And so if you try to hide it from them, you start to lose the trust of the employee, right? And I think COVID showed this a lot to us. I think a lot of companies handle this in different manners. Almost every company out there, very few of them thrived in it. A lot of them, and in the company I was with, prior to this one, we struggled with it. I had 1,400 sellers around the world, and it was April of 2020. We thought that COVID was going to be over by the end of March. It was going to be done. We're going to stay home for 2 weeks and it was be over. Well, we had to make the decision very quickly that we were going to proactively cut the sales team because we just couldn't carry that expense because the revenue was dropping down and, this looked like it was going to go on longer. We had to make a decision there about how much we actually communicated to the sales team. And when you're in a multi-level sales organization, so, I was an SVP and I had a VP and then there was a regional person, then there was a director, and then there was a seller. We had a good story of what we're doing. We're going to act early so that we could protect the company and all remaining employees long-term. That was the message. Now, what I did notice, Mario, through this, that was a great message. And we thought if it went all the way through the organization, it would be fantastic. But as you got further down in the organization, what you started hearing is, we're doing this because so-and-so said we had to cut. We're doing this because so-and-so said we had to cut. The next part of this in sales maturity or leadership maturity is, can you take the corporate message and make it your own? Can you take your vice president's message and make it your own? Because the salespeople are looking at you because you're the one conveying the message. So that frontline sales leader, they have to say, I believe in it. It has to show in their face. And we have to communicate to all these sales leaders why it's happening. And we've got to just be so transparent so that when they repeat it, it looks genuine, they're empathetic, they have all the information they need to make sure the frontline sellers believe it, right? They have to believe it.
Fair. And that kind of tees off really my next question, which is around scaling an organization to drive growth. So just as much as you just mentioned with respects to taking that message, making it their own, and having everybody believe that particular message, that is going to help in unsettled times. It's certainly going to help in times of growth as well. So how do you approach scaling a sales organization and driving growth across the various markets?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate. Most of my life has been selling into the enterprise organization. I've had some time selling into big network operators and things, but through the to the enterprise. What I've found is the great multiplier in scale is a channel, right? And it's this ability to move one step further. When you talked about Miller Hyman coming to you and signing you guys up, right? Why would they do that? They were doing that because your reach and breadth of scale was there, and they could incent you in a manner that it didn't cost them a lot unless you did well, right? That's kind of the way that channel organization works. And so, most sales organizations will go through a process where they're starting up and selling direct, and then they eventually, for scale, have to change to a channel selling organization or partner up with someone massive like Korn Ferry eventually took on Miller Hyman, right? But, so to me, channel is the great multiplier, which brings in a whole new set of issues that you're going to have, right? That now your sellers who are used to going out and hunting and winning on their own have to somehow now enable indirect sales channels to be able to do that same thing. And so you have to adjust your company into enabling these channels, incenting these channels, and you just can't always treat them the same way as a direct employee. Now, a second way that you can do this, that we're doing this here at Nextivity, is you can start to augment with, some contract sellers, which are not a channel that's an integrator and things like that, but what they are is they are focused on representing your product into a specific markets and verticals. And I think at times when you're trying to enter a vertical, it would be good to go find specialists in those verticals and that you enable them to understand your technology and promote it along with other things. And so where a good example of this is a school. Schools don't always love cellular technology, right? Sometimes some of the teachers think it's a distraction for the children in classrooms, and other people will tell you that cellular technology in a classroom helps with safety and education and teaching. If you just walked in as a cellular salesperson, you're not going to get the time of day from those companies. But if you go in with a larger IT organization into there who's selling them their Wi-Fi and their security access and their cameras and their things, and then they can then introduce cellular in a very I don't want to say threatening, but just a very casual way, they can sometimes, get to a decision maker faster than we ever could by building out our own direct sales organization.
So on that line of storytelling, so going back to the Miller Hyman story, it was very interesting. The CEO reached out to his assistant, reached out to me and said he's going to be in town in San Francisco, and he'd like to meet up with you. And I said, "Oh, okay, sure, why not?" CEO to CEO. Didn't even know that I was on his radar screen. So we sit down. And we're at breakfast. He invites me to eat breakfast with them for about an hour and a half. And he says, hey, I think I've got a couple problems. And so he lays out his problems. And I said, funny you mentioned that. You do. Here's the analysis that I did in preparation for this meeting. And he says, wow, that's interesting. He's like, could you put that together in a report for me? I said, sure, it'll cost you. And so he says, well, how much? So I say a number, I say $30,000, and he says, that's it? And I was like, should I say more? He was like, no. And I said, and so he writes $30,000 on a napkin, $30K, and then he puts an X and he signs the napkin. He's like, here's your contract.
That's fantastic.
So I said, I went back, called up my chief sales officer and my CMO, and I was like, guys, I just closed this contract. They're like, what's it for? And I was like, a sales analysis on their prospecting efforts. So that turned into actually, interesting we talk about that. That turned into a full-on sales training engagement for all 300 of their sellers. Now, going back to one of the major problems that they were having, very specifically at that time, was they had about maybe 75 direct sellers, and then the rest of the entire channel the sellers were all channel sellers. Some of them exclusive, some of them not exclusive. But what was happening is that the sellers were not progressing in promoting or driving, the solutions that they wanted to drive. And so they really wanted to teach prospecting. And a lot of this, when we think about some of the sales organizations that we have, many of us have been selling for 20, 25 years. And the way we grew up selling, Stephen, is a very different model 25 years ago than it is now. For example, I could pick up the phone 20 years ago and reach anybody at their desk. Now, I'd be lucky if I get 3 out of 100 people pick up a phone that don't know my caller ID. And so things have definitely changed in terms of like enabling the direct sellers and the channel sellers. Things have become much more complex, harder to get to our target buyers and that committee that you were talking about, or the influencers that we're talking about. Clearly, as a CCO and in all your past leadership roles, you have learned some lessons that can help other sales leaders manage and motivate their team. Talk a little bit about that. How can we today manage and motivate our team to do more, to be smarter, to work smarter, or to, work on improving that close ratio right now, or even hitting our number, which I think the latest number I saw was only 40% of sellers are forecasted to hit their sales quota in 2024, and it was around less than 50% in 2023. So talk a little bit about that. What could a sales leader do today to help manage and motivate their team?
Yeah, so I think just like most senior sales leaders, we've come up through the organization. I was an independent or a individual contributor back in 1998, right, when I started selling. And I worked for Lucent Technologies, and I was given a whole bunch of stuff I could go sell, and I crushed my quota. I did. And so what normally happens to a sales person that crushes quota, what do? Mario? They promote them, right? And they say, all of a sudden, you're now a sales leader. And I think what I started to realize, and I didn't realize this until later in my career, but you have to bring people with you as you move up as a sales leader. So I became a frontline seller originally, and if my people weren't doing as good of a job as I thought they should, what did I do? I went and did their job for them. I went on the call. I went out there and I called the contractor. I called the end user. And then guess what? That team did well because I wasn't helping them be better sellers. I was doing their job. And then I went up a level, and I realized that next level, when I became a director of sales, you better figure out how to bring people with you versus doing it yourself. And so, I started focusing on this thought of I need to focus on enabling and making others great, right? Helping them be successful. And so now we talk about what type of things did we do. The first thing that we did is, and we've talked a lot about it on here, is we trained people, right? There are plenty of things out there that are proven methods for approaching sales. I say sales is a good part art and a whole lot of science, right? That is what it is. There is an art to it also. Some people just can't do it, but even the ones that have all the art, they still gonna need some of the science behind it. And so we did do Miller Hyman. We also did when we started doing channel selling, we went through there's a gentleman named Sam Barkus that it's New Leaf Selling, but they work with Cisco and others, but they do this class called A Day in the Shoes of, and then we did it for a channel, right? So we would basically put our sellers through as if they were the CEO of an integrator. What happens when you take a person out of the field for a day for training? What happens when you do this? And you could start to see how it affected their profitability. 1% discount did this, and less competition did this. And so I think it's education is very important. Teaching them to talk to different people in different ways. But then the next thing that I would say is a good, strong sales leader organization. That your frontline sellers can only be as good as the leadership that you put in place. And that leadership has to be aligned around vision and goals. That leadership needs to support the processes that you put in place, right? Salesforce CRM hygiene, following sales processes. And then ultimately, it's about learning from wins and learning from losses. And so we do at our company here is we do each week, we have a person who has won get on and explain how did they win, what did they do, and they walk us through the process. And then we find a loss and we learn from it. And we all say, all right, what do we think we could have done differently here? What do we think we could prevent in the future? And so I think all these things build on themselves, and they also let the sellers know that we're investing in them. We care about them. And, let's face it, longevity of a seller is often, they're often the more successful sellers. You don't want to keep churning people and having to start over at zero with them to bring them up to speed. I have found that if you invest more in your current sales team, it's a faster way to profit than it is hiring, hot shots to come in and do it, that they can often be successful for a short time, but then they tend to move on to the next greener pasture. Right. So, yeah, it's a lot of stuff, Mario. I think that I just said, I spoke, so I'll pause there.
Well, I appreciate what you said. And that is I am a huge believer in training and investing in your team. But on the flip side, the individual seller has to accept that, and they have to invoke that. They have to learn from that. There's been many organizations that we have been contracted to roll out our sales prospecting training, right? And then you end up having on the other side sellers thinking that they already know it all. But if you knew it all, then you wouldn't be underperforming. And that's kind of a hard reality that, sellers hear something like, oh, I already knew that. That's not valuable. But maybe 5 minutes into before the top of the hour, you learn something. You're like, oh my God, I had no idea. Or maybe the next session, you learn something. You're like, that was a really good point. Case in point, we were just recently working with an organization, and we were talking about LinkedIn prospecting as an example. And I said to them, why do you connect with somebody? Oh, so that we can be connected on LinkedIn. Yeah, but why? And they said, well, it's another touch point. Yeah, but why? And they said, well, it's kind of like my Rolodex. I said, yeah, but why? And they didn't get it. And I said, well, let me just kind of net this out for you. Did you know that if you reached out to connect with somebody, what do you normally do if they're a new prospect? I pick up the phone and call them. I send them an email. And I said, did you know that that's the worst thing that you can do? No. Why? Well, one, we know that if they accept your connection request, that they're socially active. Would you agree? Yes. Okay. Two, your job is to send a welcome message, which is one of the things that we teach, to welcome that individual into your network, give them a valuable piece of content. Ask them a question to solicit engagement. Now, why do you want to ask them a question on the platform? I have no idea. Well, the answer is, if they reply back to you one time for the next 4 weeks, your content will show up in their newsfeed and their content will show up in yours. Now, do you care about theirs? Yeah, potentially, as you're looking at building relationship. Do you want them to see yours? Of course you do, because while they're sitting there on the toilet scrolling through their newsfeed, or before they go to bed scrolling through their newsfeed, what is working for you? It's your content, your comments, your posts that is showing up in their newsfeed. At the same time, you've got your email automation. Maybe you've got your phone calls that are taking place. So you've got 3 channels that are working for you. You've got to enable those channels. Now, what was interesting is that most sellers who thought that they knew everything around digital prospecting had no idea of the importance of that one thing. And that's where I think so many sellers get caught up on, is related to times have changed. Do you understand that we now need to think about algorithms? Yeah, how the social media algorithms work. Or how about email algorithms? For example, if you're using tools like Outreach or SalesLoft or Apollo, hello, turn off tracking. Now, nobody wants that from a leadership perspective, but why? Gmail, Yahoo, Microsoft have all invoked, if there's a tracking link inside there, we're going to put that into spam. Now, why do we have to know about these things? Because as sellers, the times have changed. And so it becomes much more complex. And those are some of the challenges that we're seeing here too. And so I'd love to just get your viewpoint on some of the biggest challenges. And I know we're coming up on time here, but briefly, some of the biggest challenges you see for a sales team in today's market when selling a complex solution, very similar to what you guys sell.
Yeah, I'd say if I look at this, I think a lot about how we sell into organizations for cellular. Historically, people just believe that cell phone should work, and it's AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon's issue, right? And Mario, I'm not going to try to date either one of us, but there was a time that the phone in your house and the lines in your house belonged to the telephone company, and you paid them for maintenance. And if your phone didn't work in your house, you know what? You had to call the telephone company, right? You can go down to Radio Shack. And by the way, I am dating us by saying this because that's where I got my first phone, and get a new phone because it belonged to the phone company. Well, the world I operate in every day is like deja vu all over again. People believing that cellular telephones working inside of buildings are the responsibility of the carrier. And so in this complex environment, I have got to also convince an enterprise that it is their issue. It is something they need to pay for. It is something that would help them be better. And so, historically, when you would sell, you would just find people who needed what you wanted, and you would sell it to them and hope that you had the best price and the best service and support, and they would buy from you. This sales process that a lot of us are in right now with new technology and this new frontier type of thing, we have to convince people that they want it, they need it, and they should have to pay for it. And that can make a really long sales cycle, right? We could go through a period of almost 18 months because we have to help them create the budget and the demand and then the requirements. And then next year we can actually get the PO. And so what I think, right now, as I look at this, we have to get sellers who understand that the work you do today may pay you back in 18 months. And, you and I talked about a lot of these, funnel management and CRMs, and the science to it. And we talk to them all the time about the funnel, what's above the funnel, in the funnel, what's your best view? How long does it take you to move through? What's your win percentage? How often do things come through? And what I think that's helped us do with our sellers is say, hey, if I don't get 3 opportunities a week into the funnel with my average deal size, I'm going to have a big problem in 18 months. So what we see out there today is that if you can convince somebody that what they're doing today will help them in 18 months, guess what happens? Your churn is so much lower with sales team members because they feel like what they're working on hasn't paid off yet. And I just got to wait till the next month and the next month and all these deals come through. So, it's kind of mixing the science with the art, getting them to know what they're doing today will help them in the future. But, it's energizing to me. It's helped me a lot. Stay engaged and involved, that things have changed so much. And so I view change as excitement. I hire people that view change as excitement. And, it's kind of where we all are today in this complex sales environment.
So this is my last comment, but Stephen, some people listening to this podcast will say, what's Radio Shack?
Yeah, I know. And what's a telephone in a house, right? Like
what's a landline?
Yeah, a landline and all these things. And I have a lot of folks like that work for me that sometimes I say things and I get the eye roll, right? I get the boomer eye roll and I'm like, all right, guys. But what I know? Diverse sales teams keeps all of us younger. It keeps all of us energized. And, just a quick, I know we're coming to the end. My favorite thing in my entire career is when my last job, we started an inside sales organization. And I was in telecom where many of our sellers have been selling for 20 and 30 years. And then we had these folks that were early in career, just out of college, come into the organization. And my more veteran sales team member said, I can't believe we're bringing in all these folks that don't even know how to sell. And then they came in and the inside sales team crushed it. And the next thing you know, we've got the 30-year seller saying, well, what did you do on LinkedIn? And how did you get through to that person? And what do you mean you called the CEO of, it was amazing to watch how they each helped each other. And, many of those inside sellers now are running organizations inside of other companies. And I think that's like the biggest success I've ever had in my career is helping, early sellers, go on and succeed.
Fantastic. Well, listen, this has been a really awesome conversation, Stephen. I've enjoyed spending time talking and reminiscing about some old days. That having been said, if someone wants to get connected with you, what's the best way? Is it through Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn? You tell us.
Yeah, I love LinkedIn. We talked about it earlier. I get on there. I try to see what all our partners are doing. I see what everybody's, what's going on out in the market. It feeds me. So I'm SMKOWAL on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with your folks out there. And I'll share back. I'll follow back.
So if you're looking for Stephen, STEPHEN, Kowal, KOWAL, and make sure you connect with him. In Modern Selling Nation, please do not reach out to Stephen blindly. Send him a personalized connection request and say you heard him on the Modern Selling podcast. Stephen, my question I've got for you, your all-time favorite movie, what is it?
Let's see if I can say one line and see if you know what it is. I'm your Huckleberry. I love Tombstone, right? Tombstone is my show. I probably watched that 100 times. I lived in Arizona for a while. I've been to Tombstone. I like Wyatt Earp. I like the Old West. I live here in Montana now. I still watch that show. And, so Tombstone is my show.
Tombstone it is, and I think that is the first time I've had Tombstone on the show in our entire Modern Selling history. Hey, Modern Selling Nation, don't turn that dial quite yet. Right now, listen to this very important message right now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.